Good evening to the folks at home. My name is Dan Toomey, and welcome to tonight's Monday night episode of See You at USC. Joining me tonight is Kristie Holmes. She's an associate adjunct professor here at USC, as well as on the board of the UN National Women's Committee. It's bound to be a fantastic interview. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for sticking with us once again. My name is Dan Toomey here, and Kristie Holmes, thank you so much for being here. It's quite an honor.
Thank you for having me.
And so just to start off, some biographical information for the folks at home who may not be aware of what you do. You're on the board for the UN National Women's Committee. You're an associate adjunct professor here at USC, involved in a countless amount of NGOs. The resume goes on and on. Just to find where this first started, we got to talk about this a little bit earlier, but a lot of what you work on is philanthropy. And where did that first begin for you?
I think it began in undergrad when I was kind of, I don't want to say the target, but I tended to draw my friends who had issues with relationships, and I decided I wanted to be a marriage counselor at some point in my undergrad career, and it sounded like a grand plan, so I went for that plan. And
different path followed then.
A different path. I went for it, and I did do that. I went ahead and I got my master's in social work, and I got a clinical license, which is years after that master's. So I got the license, and I was able to practice. And then I realized I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a marriage counselor. I don't want to necessarily do private practice. I enjoy the one-on-one time, but I realized that after a period of time that there was more to be done on a macro level.
Yeah.
Because you can sit there, especially if you're talking about clients that are in poverty or other issues that are systemic, they're going to talk about the problems and how to cope with problems rather than fixing the problem that's causing the stress, the depression. So I think that's when I started kind of diverting off of that track. And then finding that health is really an important part of mental health. Yeah. Was also an eye-opening experience for me while I was still a young social worker.
Yeah, and I mean, and being on the board for the UN, that must give you so many opportunities to work on more of the macro level of social work.
It does. I love the UN, don't get me wrong.
No, it's not.
But it's a big, I mean, I don't want to say corporation or it's an organization. It's a very large organization. There's a lot of arms, and a lot of times I'll run into people who work in different arms, and they'll say, oh, wow, do you know so-and-so? Absolutely not. I never know anybody.
Yeah, because it's such a large.
Huge. Yeah. It's absolutely huge. And some parts of the UN are more effective than others.
And since you're based in Los Angeles, and do you ever feel disconnected kind of from the UN?
Yes, and thankfully so, in a lot of ways, yes. I'm there a lot, but I'm usually there for a week or two at a time. So after you graduate and you start doing conferences, you realize you're just kind of immersed underwater for a week or two, and then you're like, oh, get me out of here, I want to go home. And yeah, it's been a good balance for me, so I feel like I'm getting plenty. Yeah. And working here, I can kind of work on things that I like more than what I'm forced to.
Work at USC specifically?
Teaching. Yeah, teaching, and any of the other, Zero Mothers Die is one of the other things I like doing. Yeah. And that's also very Skype, FaceTime oriented, where we're all on different time zones.
Yeah. So. Well, I mean, I would love to talk about that for a little bit, Zero Mothers Die. Would you just mind elaborating upon what the whole mission of that program is?
Well,
because it's fascinating.
I met the founder at a conference in Luxembourg that I go to annually, that teeny tiny country in Europe. Yeah. And I was a little bit of a strange story, but I have a lot of strange stories. But I just had a baby, and I was with my breast pump, and I had two students who were supposed to go speak for me, and they couldn't, and I'd signed a contract. So I got on a plane last minute, flew all the way to Luxembourg. I stayed for 20 minutes. Wow. Yeah, so I spent about 2.5 days, but most of it was on a plane, and I had to get back. So I had to haul around that thing with me. So a little bit awkward, but no big deal.
Well done.
And so one of the women said, is that what I think it is? And I said, it is. And so we had a friendly chat for a minute or two, and I was only there long enough for mine and to see hers, and vice versa. So we said we should keep in touch. And she was Zero Mothers Die, at the time was Millennia. So we kept in touch and actually started working together right after that. And that was 5 or 6 years ago now.
Yeah.
And that was also UN related. So that was the
That's funny. So I guess you never really know where the next opportunity is going to come.
You have no idea. And that would have not been the day I thought would be.
Yeah, exactly.
I was sleep deprived. I wanted to be there, but it was very weird. I had like a 2-month-old at home. And carrying the breast pump was awkward, but
in the
it worked
midst of chaos,
out,
you find one thing.
But they said, she's a rock star. She's going with the breast pump.
Yeah, actually, though, that shows hustle. It shows hustle and commitment, if anything.
Yeah, the commitment part. So you don't know what's going to bring people to you.
Yeah. And so now, just in terms of the work that Zero Mothers Die does, it's you're donating cell phones to third world countries.
Airtel is the one who's donating. It's a lot like our AT&T.
Yeah.
So they do that, and then airtime as well. So we get the phones, and they're smart-ish phones. I don't know if you saw them, but they have like a color screen, and they're more like old Blackberries. And it just depends on what part of the world you're in, how useful they are. So in some places, and I don't know if you've seen, they have Google Loon and some other projects they're putting out trying to bring more internet to even really rural areas in Africa. But it's preloaded with a lot of information for women who are pregnant. So
so it's specifically medical information that's preloaded.
Yeah, specifically, prenatal information, if you're hemorrhaging, that sort of thing. And the point is to also have, at the very least, a connection to a doctor or a provider somewhere. So if you're having an emergency, you can call, and then there's regularly scheduled appointments.
So it just gives them that contact.
Yes, and that is donated. So the time's free. And that way they have a lot better outcome and less likely to die. And that was one of the goals, the Millennium Development Goals that are now the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. It was lowering infant mortality and maternal.
And when did you first start to get involved with this program?
Well, we were working on women's issues in general through Millennia, which is when I met Veronique. That's who I met in Luxembourg. It went over into that. That was another project. So Millennia still exists, but this was a project unto itself. And so that's been going on for a few years. Yeah,
and one thing, I just remember researching this, and the most fascinating part of the whole Zero Mothers Die program is that the phones are pink.
Yeah.
And would you mind just going over the significance of that?
Yes, and I was talking about this at one of the big UN meetings when everybody's got the light up microphones.
Yeah.
And
the big official desk and everything.
And they call it the mum's phone, as in London English, MUM, mum's phone. And it's not because it's for a woman that it's pink, because that's actually kind of offensive for some people. But it's also because of the gender roles in a lot of places where we're giving these phones in the developing world, pink is not something that the males want to take from the female. And if you give them, say you give them an iPhone, the woman won't have that iPhone after we leave. So it's also to protect the woman and make sure she can actually use that phone. So that's why.
And to keep on this sort of a similar topic, breaking into the UN, which I assume is a predominantly male organization.
This is true.
I would just love to hear about that process of trying to make a name for yourself in it. I mean, what were the difficulties? How did you overcome them?
Well, Veronique, the same person, and this is where I can tell every undergrad, graduate student, young professional, find someone to sponsor you. I didn't know that's really who I found in Veronique, Dr. Thibodeau. But she has been amazing to me over the years, and I didn't find her until later, not knowing what she would be willing to do. And it's not people who are just going to mentor you, because lots of people can give you advice. Yeah. But she has pushed me forward or said, you are perfect for this, or even when I don't have confidence or didn't have the confidence to think that I could do this thing. She'd put me on publications I hadn't written yet. She wrote the nomination letter for me for UN Women, and she's always had more confidence in me even than I probably had in myself. So I think there are certain people who help you along when they can see what you're capable of. And so where was the question that I got diverted on?
I mean, I think
men and how you break it. Well, and I don't know if you just saw that we just got the new Secretary General who's in charge, the guy in charge of the UN, and there was a campaign for years leading up to it for a female. Yeah. Helen Clark and some others, and they didn't get it. And it was a disappointing blow.
Yeah,
I mean, he can be great, he can be fine, but can we really not find a female in all the time of the UN that's skilled enough to lead the UN? I think it's nonsense that we can't. So, well, good for him. It was disappointing. And it's just one of those things, same as politics, that it's not that men are trying to keep women out. It's just that the men are there. And so if the men are there, you tend to help who you know and who are your friends. And you tend to be closer to the people, especially career-wise, who you're with. And so if men are with other men, they tend to promote the men they're with. And so
it's just it's a cyclical thing.
Not an outsider, whether she's male or female.
Yeah.
And so that's been kind of the surprise, I think, over the years. I found that it's not so much anybody trying to keep anybody out, whatever diversity it is. It's more everybody looks like you in the first place, and you're familiar with the people who look like you, so you're promoting those who are like you.
So it's almost like there's sort of an inner circle to begin with. It's not necessarily you're from a certain demographic, we don't want you. It's more of just like, if you weren't with this group in the beginning, it's going to be hard to enter it.
Exactly. And I did a study a few years ago, and it was UNESCO, which is also related to the UN, but it was also about women in broadcast. And a lot of it had to do, and I said, being here made it easier to just go talk to some cinematographers, go talk to writers. And I was expecting something more sinister, because Hollywood has some sinister stuff about it.
Indeed,
But this is not what I was finding.
Really?
I was finding that it was kind of the same thing. Well, we were looking for a female cinematographer, but I looked at 90 Vimeo reels, and they were all men, except for 2. And they weren't very good, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So maybe they were biased against the 2 they did look at. But the truth was there were 88 that were men.
So that's funny. So it's not necessarily a male versus female thing. It's more of just like who you know, would you say?
Well, and I think some of it's biased too, because females do the same thing when there are groups of all females, where just the comfort level. It's like, okay, I know how this works, especially and I'm in social work, so we have nominal males. We don't. It's not so much male dominated, but usually those in charge of us are male. So the boards are often very much male. So working all in one gender is not good.
Yes, yes. And it's funny. I was actually going to ask you about that. How do you see us kind of breaking out? What do you think we should do to break out of that cycle? Do you see?
Well, I think all men, especially young men and teen men, have a really important role in this. And when I've worked with he for she, the Emma Watson speech was amazing, and I absolutely support everything she's done. When that happened, I love the fact that it was hitting college. It was kind of going college and up, not as much down demographically. And that's when I wanted to do Team He for She, which was reaching out to younger teenagers so that the message spread more that way. Because I think, middle school kids and teenagers are the ones in high school are the ones who are actually help changing some of this.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have a 9-year-old son who really does think he thinks it's silly, fair is fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is silly, fair is fair. And so, but he's also grown up being 9 years old. He hasn't known anything other than an African-American president, and now Hillary Clinton running.
It's a completely different perspective that they're growing up in.
So I think time will just change. Death will change things, Those who are, headed towards the grave will, expire, and some of those thoughts will also expire, but some things will stick because they're training those who are still here.
Exactly.
So I think being very intentional about it, and I don't necessarily like quotas, but being really aware of if we have 9 white older men on a panel or a board.
Something's gotta.
Yeah.
That's a little.
Hashtag all male panel.
Yeah. That's the squeaky wheel. And so the way you see it, it's more of just a matter of how we bring the future up rather than trying to change the present, would you say?
Changing the present's important too, but you can't change it the same way you're training those who are younger. The present, I found, the only way you're really going to see some change, especially, and I don't want to pigeonhole those over 50 or 60 years old, but it's just harder.
Exactly.
I feel like with any of the agreements that are made, it's either to make them look better as an organization or a company, or that it will make them more money. And a lot of times it will make more money.
So the decisions really aren't based too heavily on the issue itself, more of just like, that's interesting.
Yes, like if you have, and they have found, if you have women CEOs, coupled with male CEOs, they're going to make more money. So if you sell it as, if you do this thing, you're going to make more money, be more successful, have a better reputation, they're more likely to make these changes or be willing to say, okay, we will guarantee 2 slots for a female or someone who's gay or whatever the diversity is you're going for, you've got to ask for it specifically. So especially in the older demographic, I feel like you've got to be specific on what you're asking for and why, and it needs to be a selling point for them.
Exactly. Well, it sounds like even in the first half of the episode, we've solved a lot of world problems here so far. Hopefully this will continue in the second half. Kristie, thank you so much for being here. Stick with us after this commercial break. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Thank you very much for sticking with us. My name is Dan Toomey once again, and Kristie Holmes still here with us. Thank goodness for this very, very fruitful conversation we've had so far earlier. I think we've talked about a lot of important stuff that faces both the older and newer generations coming in. And you mentioned earlier your NGO He for She, and I would just love to talk more about that because there's so much going on. If you wouldn't mind just giving an introduction about it.
Absolutely. Well, when I'd said before that Emma Watson had done the speech, and that went viral, and a lot of people watched it. It's one of those things I was there live for, and you don't realize at that moment that this is actually going to change things. I actually had to change in the taxi cab in New York to make it to that, and I was a little frustrated that I had to go to another event because it was an added event rather than starting Monday. I had to do it on Saturday. I remember that specifically. But Kiefer Sutherland was going to be there. I was like, 24th.
That's an obligation.
Yeah, Jack Bauer's going, so I made sure to be there. But I was amazed by her speech, and I honestly was like, really, Emma Watson? I don't really see it. And then she did her speech, and I was like, wow, yeah, okay, good job. Yeah. But after that, I just noticed, because my Facebook, my Twitter, all of my social media is all over the place. I actually got a call from a publisher wanting me to do a book because they found my Twitter following to be so bizarre.
Really?
And it was the weirdest conversation I'd had in a while. But I said, why do you say that? They said, you've got like TED Talk followers and you've got 12-year-olds. You've got, you've got all sorts of people that follow. And I thought that was really interesting, but I think it has to do with a lot of this. So He for She was aiming too high, I felt like, age-wise, and I wanted to focus, especially in the U.S., on talking to younger kids, especially on. And that was also when Columbia was dragging around the mattresses, sexual assault, all of that was going on. Yeah. And I felt like this needs to be talked about before we get to college.
Yeah.
And
especially kids can't grow up feeling like that's just stuff that gets swept under the rug usually.
Yeah, and it's not when it starts happening. So, I mean, if we're realistic, it's happening in middle school and it's happening in high school. Yeah. So I was at Sundance with one of my friends who also, she's a nonprofit attorney, and we met while running for office, other story. But we had a mutual friend, and she knew somebody who knew somebody, and they're like, oh, Rowan would love to get involved. She loves He for She. And I was like, who's Rowan? I had no idea, not really my age group. So long story short, like, okay, fine, we'll do a meeting and see. And there's no money involved in any of these things. It's pretty much volunteer unless you're in that building over there. So that actually took some of the pressure off. And we're like, let's just see what happens. And so we did International Day of the Girl. We started like a Twitter conversation. Instagram's a lot harder to have conversation with. She can post things, have a lot of followers, but most of the conversation happened on Twitter. But we had, 8 million talking within the first 4 days of when we launched. And it ended up being one of those things that I ended up being so happy that I did. And most of my board did not understand why I wanted to go that young. Like, I don't really get it. And I was like, really, I just feel like we've got to move to a younger age, even if it's not my age group.
No, definitely. I mean,
so it's been great. And since then, she's totally blown up. She has like 4.5 million Instagram followers, and she does a lot of feminism, and she's in front of Vogue and the rest of it. So it's been good.
And do you think that adds into the effect because social media is such an integral part of kids my age or younger? Do you think that helps spread awareness easier, would you say?
It does, and it does to an extent. So I think awareness is probably, since that, especially where I am and what I'm doing, and no funding, that's also a big thing with NGOs.
Yes.
That's free.
Yeah.
So it's volunteering your time and then finding a way to make an impact without which you need an influencer. So for that age group, no one knew who she was, but she was 13 years old and had millions of followers. And so that's an impact right there. And it brought in a lot of other people into the conversation. So, so that, I mean, it's a huge part of it. I think the older we get, the less effective it is in changing anything. I think people love to share, but they don't actually do. Same with voting.
Yes, that's
posting is not voting; it's complaining. It's not.
You
show up.
Unless you get out there and actually vote. And have you seen that as a problem for recent years?
Yes, and I ran for office once, and that was part of my time here. And that was just because we were trying to make a point. I was actually trying to get my graduate students on campus here to run. Just to see, because I teach the stuff. Teaching is not the same thing as doing, as we all know, in some shape or form, but this really is not the same thing. And it was one of those things that just kind of kept going beyond the time I meant it for it to. It was like, let's see what would happen. How do you run for Congress? And in the meantime, I met amazing people. So I had a really good experience, which I'm not sure everyone has, running for office. I got to see a little bit of the dark underbelly, but there's a lot of good people out there trying to make a difference too. So. But voting, trying to get people to vote is difficult. People really don't have confidence in our system. Or they just don't feel like it matters. And California can be hard. California, Hawaii can be hard because by the time the polls aren't even closed and they're announcing who's won. So it can be frustrating.
And do you feel that's a problem? Because we've talked a lot about different generations and age gaps. Do you think that's more of a problem with kids closer to my age or the older generations?
I'm not sure. I feel like a lot of, because I don't really have the 20-year-olds, I'm not as much in touch with now, so I've moved below that. But I feel like the ones who are, say, 14, 15, 16-year-olds now are more likely to ask their parents about who they're voting for. And I'm finding that my 9-year-old is way more engaged on this political level, and I don't know if it's because of Trump. I can thank him for one thing, I guess.
Really?
I won't tell you all the things he says, but it has made them interested, and it's caused controversy on their little campus and the rest of it because of some of the things that have been said in this campaign. But it has piqued interest as far as what's okay and what's not okay and what leadership means. So.
And that's funny. As a mother, do you feel, what's your take on this election and its effect on your kids? I mean, because that has to be such an interesting perspective, having both a political side, but then you're also a mother on the same side.
It was great. It was great for a while until, I know we can't say those words. I don't say that word. The P word came up, and it's like, okay, that is not really what I want to be doing during dinner time or during the debate schedule. Is trying to explain sexual assault along with the birds and the bees.
And they were exposed to that, right?
And it's just prime time, And
true.
That's not. I mean, it's not the first time there's been anything, creepy in an election or anything. But I still think even Clinton, old Clinton, even with the Lewinsky scandal and all of that, it still wasn't as obvious for us to ask the kind of questions.
It wasn't. It wasn't as open.
I don't think anyone really knew what the cigar meant unless you're old enough to know. It's one of those things. So it was definitely, dirty, but it wasn't as out there as this is. And the word sexual assault and all that just keeps getting repeated and repeated and repeated. So I've had to have a talk also with my 5-year-old about how, people touching you, because what do they mean, or grabbing her,
That's
you don't want
crazy.
people touching you. So I guess in some ways it's forcing families to have conversations maybe before they were ready.
Yeah, a little early.
But things do happen. So.
And you said how in the beginning you said it was great. And did you feel like that was because there was a lot of publicity around this election, or are you a parent that will expose your kids to politics so they're informed early? Or?
Well, they were around when I ran for office, so they had a lot of questions then. But my son was interested even before that, and he used there was a sign on it. I don't know if you guys saw it. It was during the 2 years ago, the midterm elections, and it was someone running for school board or something, but it said, best educated was their like street sign, their yard sign.
I bet.
And my son goes, that is not a very nice thing to write. And I said, you are right about that. He's like, you shouldn't say best educated because that doesn't make you a better person. And I was like, okay, that was insightful for an 6-year-old at the time, actually. Yeah. So however old he was. 8. Yeah. So.
And do you think it's a matter of more open coverage of this election than in past years, or
why did they start covering? Like when the Republican side had, because they kept calling it teams, this side and that side. Why do they have so many on the Republican side and not so many? So that was kind of confusing for them because to them there were 2 teams and one team had a whole lot more than the other team.
Yeah.
So that they were interested in that, and they picked out who they liked and didn't like right off.
And what would you think about families that may not have the political background of your family? Do you think that they would naturally become more involved in politics given the current state of things?
Yes.
Or really?
Yes. So I'm thinking that I don't know if it's necessarily a positive way, given some of my social media feeds. And I make sure to stay friends with everyone I disagree with.
Well, so I mean, that's healthy. It's political discourse,
healthy,
right?
Yes. Yeah. And there's sometimes not a whole lot of discourse, but at least you understand or know. Yeah. And trying to understand the other side, that there is a valid reason why people are interested in Donald Trump, for instance. Yeah. It stems from anger or whatever it is. It's more helpful to try to understand than just dismiss, even if you completely disagree. Not saying, not being political. But
Not to delve too deep into things. And what if there's one thing, because we've talked a lot today about younger generations and bringing them up in a correct light. What's one thing that you could take out of this election as like a lesson or a theme, and giving that to younger generations moving forward, if you could think of any?
Well, just talking even to my kids and their friends, because they definitely have their own opinions, and they talk amongst themselves, which has been a shock to me.
Really?
And they've even drawn pictures and like campaign type stuff, which has nothing to do with that's their thing. The other parents weren't running for office, so it's been interesting. But they're listening to everything. And they do have a sense of right and wrong and how you treat people. And I feel like even in LAUSD and our public schools, we're really trying to teach them peace talks. That's one of the things that they go to Wonderland and they talk a lot about peace talks and how you dialogue with people, and they come home with these big ideas. And so that matched up with what they're seeing on TV. It's not matching. So this is not how we want things to be. And this is, how did this happen? They asked that question a lot. How did this happen? Well, we choose them. Yeah. So getting involved with primaries. And so they do understand that before there were a lot more options. And we have to actually vote early as far as primaries are concerned, not just wait till the general election.
And how young is your youngest?
9 months.
Cultivating the next leaders of America right here on CU USC. Kristie, thank you so much for joining us. It's really been a pleasure. For Kristie Holmes, for myself, Dan Toomey, this has been the Monday night episode of CU at USC. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you tomorrow.
You're watching Trojan Vision. For more of your favorite shows, check us out at trojanvision.com and like us on Facebook.
Here's the story of a TV manager who had a team to help out with the station. There's HR, web, graphics, busy showrunners, and station operations.